Hey folks, this is Dan back from the Conan chronology with another episode of the Unsung Sword of Conan, and this is one that I've been wanting to do for a little while, partially because so far I have only covered the Savage Sword of Conan, and I've been wanting to cover Roy Thomas's Conan the Barbarian, because there are a couple of hidden gems in here that are definitely worth celebrating. And I wanted to start with Conan the Barbarian number 92, which is an adaptation of Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter's story, The Thing in the Crypt. Now, The Thing in the Crypt was published in 1967 in the collection Conan, so it already existed by the time Roy Thomas started writing the Conan the Barbarian book in late 1970, so it was sitting there for a little while. When they started writing the book, they didn't actually have any rights to official Robert E. Howard stories, which is, I think, one reason why the title gets off to such a slow start, but it's genuinely not a great beginning to the comic. But eventually they did negotiate a couple of Robert E. Howard stories, so we got like The Twilight of the Grim Grey God, and we got Roy Thomas's adaptation of Rogues in the House, and The God in the Bowl, and The Tower of the Elephant, and things like that. But they didn't have the rights to other Conan stories, especially the Conan pastiches that were coming out from Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter, and to a lesser extent Bjorn Nyberg at the time. Carter actually agreed to let them adapt some of his stories. De Camp was dragging his feet, so after a little while, Roy Thomas just said, fuck it, I'm not going to adapt The Thing in the Crypt. I'm going to come up with my own Crypt story, and that will replace Thing in the Crypt in the early Conan continuity. So he ended up trying to figure out what he was going to have in his Crypt, other than the creepy thing that attacks Conan in the original story. And his wife at the time, Jean Thompson, just suggested, why don't you have him fight his own shadow? So he had Conan fight his own shadow in a story called The Shadow in the Tomb. And that's actually, originally when I approached that issue, I thought, oh, this is going to suck if it's not exactly the original thing, and they're going to have to, come up with some BS way to get around it. But I actually think that issue is really successful. Roy adds this frame narrative where Conan is waylaid with some other Turanian mercenaries, and they're trapped in a cave. So he starts thinking about this time he was trapped in a cave and fights his own shadow. And he has this sword that he pulls from a skeletal hand. And at the end of it, he wonders what happened to that sword. And it turns out that one of the other guys had it, who he just killed. So as he wonders, should I have held on to it, we are kind of given the answer that no, you shouldn't have held on to it, and you ultimately made the right decision. So it ties it a little more strongly to the Conan continuity at the time. And all in all, it's a pretty good issue. But a couple of years later, in 1978, I think it is, Roy finally does get the rights to The Thing in the Crypt. And John Buscema, the regular artist, was actually on vacation. So instead of continuing the regular book, they decided to do a sort of interlude episode where they would go back to The Thing in the Crypt. And they enlisted John Buscema's little brother Sal for the cover. You can see the SBEC over here on the cover for Sal Buscema and Ernie Chan. So they get Sal Buscema to step in for one issue, which I don't think anybody should really worry about, because Sal and John Buscema, their art looks really, really similar, especially when it's being inked by Ernie Chan. It's going to look almost indistinguishable. But we have a great cover here. This is so excellent. When we open it, we get our, of course, Conan's running from these ravenous wolves and the Hyperborean slavers that captured him in Legions of the Dead, except this is where this story gets kind of weird. Roy adds this special Nemedian note, which is sort of like a chronological marker, and it tells us that this issue should take place between issues 2 and 3. But our problem is we already had a story that took place between issues 2 and 3. So it's rather clumsy here. Conan has two almost identical adventures at the exact same point in his life. So they'll try to solve it by the end of the issue, but we'll get there. One thing that I think is kind of interesting is I've never seen this before in any Marvel comic. Roy Thomas is credited as our writer and editor, and then we get the ampersand, and then it's Ernie Chan, the inker and embellisher. I have never seen an inker elevated to the status of being equal to the writer there, and perhaps they should be. But I've never seen it before. So we have welcome guest penciler Sal Buscema down here, and George Roussos is our colorist for this issue. I'm going to bring him up later, so I thought I'd point him out here. Now Conan fights these wolves, and we get a little bit of a flashback to how he got here. He was running from the Hyperborean slavers and choked one of them out before escaping. A little more peril as he uses his chain to kind of fight off these wolves before ultimately he finds a crevice in a wall that he goes ducking into, and the wolves are very noticeably scared of this area. They don't want to come in. Instead, they just whimper outside of it. And he says, and that is strange. And this page is why I originally thought maybe I need to do an Unsung Sword episode or column about this issue, because these all blue panels here are so cool. And I hadn't seen anything like it really before. This is just to simulate the darkness of the cave as Conan goes deeper into the crypt. And he's obviously groping around in the dark, and he feels the warning here. The untutored Sumerian youth, fresh from illiterate villages, does not know that it's a warning, but he can probably guess. Anyway, I just think it's so cool how blue all of these pages are. I found out that Roy and possibly the Marvel staff as a whole would call these knockout panels. And originally I thought that might be because they just knocked the reader's socks off, because they really did for me. They've got a really strong visual impact. But I think it's much more likely that it was just easier for the colorist to knock them out really easily. Because we have just the black ink of the inker, and then we also have the, a solid blue color here. Still, very cool effect. I loved it. Conan gropes around in the dark for a little bit before finding enough to make a fire with. And then I think this is maybe the coolest thing about coming out of the knockout panels. Suddenly, as he does so, just the colors of his skin, his helmet, and the fire and the sticks, they look so much more vibrant than they probably normally should because of the blue that preceded it. It's just a very cool comic book effect. And then we get this excellent splash page with the thing in the crypt as Conan recoils and says Crom's Devils. This is an excellent one that you will see all over the internet. I also think this is a great example, not just of Sal's beautiful art and the great colors from George Roussos, but how Roy can just mimic the florid prose of sword and sorcery writers with stuff like, for a moment he almost flees back toward the hungry wolves rather than face this monstrous, grinning cadaver, in whose sunken sockets the wavering firelight seems to paint dark, burning eyes. That's so fucking cool, and I love it. It's just so creepy and atmospheric as Conan grabs this sword and feels like a tough guy for a moment. Then we get so many ads in these old issues. And then the thing, of course, comes to life, and it has its eyeless gaze that I think is so cool. Conan fights it for a little while, and I love that we probably get the best line from the prose story in which Conan asks, how can you kill a thing that is already dead, as he hacks away at its temples and its arms and its ribs and everything. And I do think this is a pretty cool kill. I always love when Conan can do something other than hack at something to kill it. He is able to flip it kind of backward over himself and end up burning it into nothingness. And it looks pretty cool on the page. It's probably even better in the prose story. But we end with more excellent coloring from Mr. Roussos here. Suddenly the pages just get bathed in this orange and yellow and red, and it looks so good, kind of engulfing the whole panel. And, Conan stumbles out here with this great sword that's his. And I love this fourth to last panel here, this wide one that Conan is just yellow and red all over. It kind of looks like a sunset, even though I know it's the inside of the cave with the fire and the smoke in the background and everything. It looks so awesome. Truly excellent Bronze Age work here. And Conan moves on to keep going south. But here is Roy's just really kind of clumsy, not that cool way of solving his chronology issue. It says, Nemedian Chronicler's Note. We know, of course, that young Conan lost his strange, if unmagical sword ere long when he was captured by a second group of warlike Hyperboreans not far from the borders of Brithunia, and perhaps in his way, the Cimmerian was lucky at that. For can any good thing come out of a crypt? So they just decided both the shadow on the tomb and the thing in the crypt are going to be canon, and Conan is just going to have the same adventure twice in a row almost. And we're just don't think about it too hard, because these are things that you throw away anyway. Please don't ever invent trade paperbacks so that these are easily reproduced. Anyway, this is an excellent issue in kind of the later years of Roy's tenure writing the original Conan the Barbarian book, and honestly, I don't think he has a lot left in him. The issues through 100 are pretty good, and then it really takes a downturn after that until issue 115, which is a really great way to send himself off. But this was one of his last better issues on the title before leaving in 1980, and truly just an excellent issue overall. So thanks so much for watching with me. Let me know what you think of this issue. And I've started to get some people who are actually kind of suggesting, hey, can you take a look at this issue for me of Savage Sword or Conan or whatever it might be. Let me know if you got them. Thanks for watching, folks.